Welcome everybody to the imperat webinar, Dashboards are Dumb Data, Why Smart Analytics Will Kill Your KPIs. I'm going to be your presenter today. My name is Luciano Pesci. I am the founder and director of research at the Utah Community Research Group at the University of Utah, where I teach econ students and business students how to take real research, real data analytics, and turn it into insights for community partners, mostly nonprofits. I also teach statistics, American history, and economic development as well there at the U. I'm also the CEO and co-founder of Imperat. We're a team of analysts, data scientists, and economists who find actionable business intelligence through marketing analytics and agile research. And we do this right now currently. Here's my basic argument today. And I want to, from the beginning, set the tone of something, which is that I'm not anti-dashboard. The title itself may have come across as being anti-dashboard. That is not the case. I believe that dashboards are an incredible piece of modern technology. They represent amazing progress that we've made in the last even 5 years. And Bryce is telling me that he cannot hear me. How is that? Is that better, Bryce? The sound is really poor. So dashboards have a place in modern business, but what I think my complaint with them in the case I'm making today is that dashboards are dumb data in the same sense that we have a dumb phone and a smartphone, or a home phone, a smart house and a dumb house. We're at this point now where technology is starting to become intelligent in that it can learn for itself, it can adapt, and dashboards don't do that. That might be the next wave. That might be dashboard version 3. But as of right now, they are very static, even if they're updating in real time. And even if they allow you to explore, all of that data is there, and what you can do with it is predefined and limited. It's just software. And so because of that, there are real limitations. And my big issue as a data person with dashboards is that the way in which they're sold to people right now is that they are a end-all, be-all solution, that all you have to do is sign up for this or that company, and suddenly you're going to get intelligent information out of what is otherwise useless data or data that you just have never looked at. And I just don't believe that to be true, and I'm going to make that case today. And so there's 4 parts to this webinar. The first is that we're at a position right now where the information is coming in real time or in near real time. And I'll make a distinction about that and point out how we got to that place. This leads directly into why there are so many dashboard solutions today. It is a bubble in every sense. We're going to look at the Tableau stock. I'm going to talk about the different options that are available out there. And every day we find new providers who are taking digital information and translating it usually into simplistic charts and graphs for people to passively look at. And this gets into my third point, which is that smart analytics, which is something that is being developed right now, in part because dashboards are failing to deliver on their promise, it is a new way of dealing with data and analytics. It requires humans right now. I have no doubt the machines will do the majority of it in the very near future. But presently, this is still a human effort, and it takes an entire team to do it. And if you want to have that kind of success at your company where you're using data for strategic information and decision making, it is a team effort. It requires that you build a data culture. And that's where I will end, covering the differences, the subtle differences in the term data scientist, and setting up for the next webinar, which will actually be based on how to develop and grow internal talent and make this data culture a reality. So near real time or die. Today is actually the 95th anniversary of my paternal grandmother coming to the United States through Ellis Island. And she took a ship from Italy, from northern Italy, to the United States. And I believe at that time it was still a 3-week journey. I saw a story earlier today about a DARPA concept plane that can make that same distance travel in 11 minutes. And just like there has been this massive gain in physical speed, being able to move people and things around the world, information has had the same kind of growth, and in some ways it's been even bigger. We have real-time information available to us. We have real-time communication. This is the result of being connected digitally, satellites, broadband, infrastructure. A lot of investment has gone into allowing people to communicate, and as a result, when information is exchanged, there's data. And why does real time matter? Why are we getting to the point where you have to be able to see something in real time to survive? And that's because the pace of competition in the marketplace right now is higher than it's ever been. As an economist, I can tell you that this kind of a competitive environment has rarely ever existed in history. And if you aren't watching your competitors right now, they are definitely watching you. This is so that they can make gains on your brand recognition or your market share. They can find better sourcing than you, and they can lower costs, which will capture more of the market. All those cost savings can be put into innovation, which will outcompete you. This is a constant and real time struggle. And so data has become the piece that for the last at least 15 years was a big, big differentiator. And all you have to do right now is look at the major corporations in the world, Apple, or even just let's start in the United States, Apple, Google, Amazon. These are all companies that have been very, very successful in utilizing data and information technology in their growth. And while that might have been enough 5, 10, 15 years ago to capture an entire market, that is not the case today. And we'll get into what the next piece, the next competitive advantage will be. Some of the data sources that are available for competitive intelligence that are motivating the need for real time have also taken the form of dashboards. So Nuvi is a good example, another company here from Utah. They do social listening. SpyFu is great for SEO and PPC. So any sort of search engine marketing information, they will show you your performance, your competitor's performance, the industry level performance. Moat is great for aggregating what people are doing with banner ads and display networks all across the internet. CI Radar is a operational insights company, so they will give you, I think their tagline is, will give you the information that your competitors don't want you to see. So there's the reality that some of this information is public, and just because of the nature of it being public, it's available to anybody. There's also proprietary information, and a lot of dashboards are built on that you tap in your data sources, and then that proprietary information is available to you and only you. Companies like CR Radar are trying to estimate it or scrape it from public sources. If you put it on your server and it's not even linked to a page, that information might still be there. Those PDFs might still be there. So they specialize in getting competitive intelligence and data from sources that are not very well known or might not be public. Glassdoor is a good example of another tool that you could use while its main purpose is not to give you competitive intelligence for estimating maybe the cost or structure of your competitor. I mean, its main purpose is for helping people find jobs as they move around. It also gives a lot of insight into what a competitor's cost structures and roles are like. You can use LinkedIn for this as well, where you can go and you can see, okay, who do they have? What are their titles? How many people do they have? What are their connections? And you can start to estimate the network. And this gives you information again around costs and sourcing, which will allow you to be more competitive on price, which should allow you to capture more market share. And then Quid is probably the coolest of any of these because Quid tries to do at the macro level what each of these smaller solutions does in isolation. So Quid is the closest thing that we have to a broad macro trend competitive intelligence tool. You just type in questions and it brings out data and insights, again, in the form of a dashboard from all of the aggregation that it does. And these tools are available to you right now. You can go sign up for them. That means your competitor can go sign up for them. Again, most of them use dashboards, but it's this reality, and that's my point. It's the reality of the state of competition today that you need real-time or near to real-time information. So the next differentiator then, if everybody can have this data, is speed. And I want to clarify my distinction between real-time and near real-time. So when you go to get any sort of dashboard solution or you go to build your dashboard yourself in some of these solutions, one of the things that you're going to have to address is how often is the data going to get refreshed? And what is that refreshing going to do? Is it going to be a manual process where every month we download CSV files and then we put them into a folder structure and then the dashboard draws from that? Is it manual entry into a form and then that data is put into a database the dashboard can grab? Or is it through API connectivity? So it's real time in the sense that whenever you issue a call, you get the data. You might be limited in how often you can call. You might be limited in what you can get in each call. You might be limited by the reality that you have so much data to transfer that it's going to take a certain amount of time. Those things affect whether this is really real time or not. And my encouragement to you would be, as you look at data dashboard solutions, be realistic about how often you're going to use the information. Because everybody wants to have that awesome, cool ticker where they watch it come in. This is where Nuvi is great. I mean, visually, Nuvi is one of the most beautiful SaaS products out there. And you can watch it just, they call it the stream. You can just watch it flow by. And that's incredible. And that's useful in social media where one post or one thing can trigger a watershed movement. That's probably not the case with any sort of digital marketing data where you may not be able to get it refreshed from people like Google unless it's the end of the day. It could be that you're going through APIs where you're limited to a call in every 15 minutes. It might be that some of the information doesn't even change month over month and you just need it updated quarterly. So when I say real time or near real time, it doesn't matter to me if this is being measured in fractions of a second. If the information is useful in fractions of a second, then try to find real time solutions that will get you that kind of information. If you can look at it once a week, that might be real enough time or just in time data, which would be good enough. So understanding how you're going to use it and why you need it will help you determine which of these kinds of solutions you need, because some of that's tied to what you will actually pay. And we'll get into this with the dashboard solutions. Some of it is based on users. Some of it's based on the amount of data that you have. Some of it's based on combinations of those. Some of it's based on how often you need the data refreshed. And I would say that on the fast end, the kind of industry average is probably somewhere around 5 minutes. If you're refreshing every 5 minutes, most people are considering that real-time data. If you're refreshing once a day, some people consider that real-time data. This chart that is on this slide that we're looking at is the value of Tableau stock. I think it was yesterday was their 3-year anniversary. It's been an interesting, especially last couple of months for Tableau. They have been the golden child of dashboards for the last, I'd say, 2 years. They have a program called Teaching for Tableau. It's a very, very smart approach. You give the software for free to students and to teachers to encourage them to utilize in the classroom. The students get trained on it. They go out into the public sector. They get jobs. They tell their employer they need Tableau, and then they buy Tableau. And this is a good portion of what led to their growth, along with other good marketing and the fact that it's a solid product. But it took a huge hit recently, as you can see, and this is because a lot of competitors are coming into the market. And this has all the markings of a bubble. So as an economist, I'll tell you this is clear bubble territory we're in right now. The different types of dashboards that we're going to cover the pros and the cons for, and then I'm going to talk about some of the alternatives. There's a bunch of ways to group these dashboards. The first is that it could be one that's built into existing software, but the main purpose of that software is not to give you the data. So a good example of this from a SaaS product standpoint is AdWords or HubSpot, where the main purpose of that is to organize other things, so campaigns or sales leads and deals. But a byproduct of that is it's nice to look at where things are at an aggregate level. And so because of that, those tools have built a dashboard for themselves. That's one form. And you're getting those dashboards usually for free whenever you're buying whatever other value proposition that's really behind the tool. So in the case of Nuvi, the value proposition is social listening. You are able to hear the social chatter that is happening in real time. The dashboard is just the interface by which you do it. So you're not buying that dashboard to then plug in your particular social channels, although I think that is an added feature of Nuvi now. But once you start to talk about aggregating different data sources and then displaying them, you're moving into a different type of dashboard. And this is where solutions like Tableau or Grow are really, really great options. Sometimes you can group dashboards by the size or the type of the organization that they serve. So some of these solutions are enterprise only. The pricing is enterprise level. The integration requires enterprise infrastructure. They are not made for small and medium businesses. But a more general way to group them, given that it could be based on size, it could be based on the type, is, well, in any of these, do you do it yourself or is it just all done for you? Because even at the SMB level, there are those options. And at the enterprise level, there are absolutely those two options. So let's go through the two different types, the do-it-yourselfs and the turnkey solutions, and then I'll move into the pros and cons, and then I'll start to talk about smarter analytics. So if you're going to look for a do-it-yourself solution, and this is where most of the growth in dashboards is happening, it is hard to create enterprise-level organizations that can handle any kind of data set for turnkey solutions. And so you'll see that that market is just smaller. But the other reason that the do-it-yourself solution has exploded in total number of options and in the variety of what you can do with those options is because this is cheap. This is easy. You just build software and then it's on other people to learn how to do it. And so this will be one of the main cons against these do-it-yourself solutions is you do have to do it yourself, which means you have to have the skills necessary, and that can be very different. So Clear Analytics is just a macro for Excel. So if you're pretty comfortable in Excel, you can get Clear Analytics for free and you can start doing dashboarding. Microsoft responded to this with Power BI, which is free, or you can get upgraded features and added users and different data set sizes, and you can move to a paid subscription, which starts at $10 a month. And all these values I'm going to give here are in annual dollars. R Shiny is a great free option, but unlike Power BI or Clear Analytics, where you're going to be using Excel, which is something you're already familiar with, R Shiny requires that you understand how to use R. And that is a programming language, and it's not difficult to learn, but it is a learning curve. And so if you don't have that skill, that's something you're going to have to get before you can utilize that particular do-it-yourself solution. And this is where the threshold changes here. So there's a couple of these small scale you have to have the skill to use, but they're free or very low cost alternatives. Well, if you want somebody to do a lot of that for you, to make it very easy for you, Tableau being a good example, Click being another, they've built great interfaces that allow you to not just look at data, but also allow you to explore it. And Tableau is the biggest example. Adaptive Insights and Click are two others. I think Click is very interesting because they have come in and it looks very similar to Tableau. It functions very similar to Tableau, but it is at a significantly lower price point, and it's on a monthly subscription if you want to use their cloud version. Tableau has traditionally been something that you actually download and install. The starting cost of Tableau is about $1,500. The license itself is the $1,000, and then you've got this one-time fee, and then there's these annual fees. So it's not a insignificant amount of money, but for $1,500 for what Tableau does, I still think that that is a real value. Adaptive Insights is where you start to move into the same kind of pricing that you'll find with do-it-yourself solutions. Now, Adaptive Insights' value proposition is you do it, but you get to do so much more than you can with any of these other do-it-yourself solutions. If what you're looking for is just a quick and easy turnkey solution where you're going to just tell people what you need, they're going to go and get it and make it happen for you, and then the data will be there, which also means that if you want to update or change things, you may have to go through them. There are really three viable solutions right now. I know that there are many, many more. I'm not even talking about the Oracles. I'm not even talking about some of these giant enterprise solutions. And Domo's right there, kind of like Adaptive was with the do-it-yourself solutions. Domo starts to verge, and they're clearly after the enterprise market. But there are some that are available to SMBs, and there are some SMBs that are using Domo. The lowest cost option that we found that we think is worth people's attention is Yellowfin. At about $3,000 a year, it's a basic turnkey dashboard system. Another and far more interesting one, and one that we have our eye on, is Grow. They're also a Utah company. They are compared very often to Domo. It seems that there are some meaningful differences, especially around price, because for Grow, from everything that I could find online, it's about $500 a month. With Domo, and the last 2 years, if you didn't live in Utah, and we are from Utah, and so is Domo, and so is Grow, and so is Nuvi, and some of these other companies that we've covered today. Domo has been incredibly difficult to get information about in the last 2 years. And lots of NDAs, nothing around pricing could be shared. I've seen estimates going from 50,000 up, but the bottom line is that to move into something like Domo versus something like Grow or Yellowfin, there's a significantly higher cost and the process is much more difficult. And this will come down, whether it's worth it or not, comes down to the pros and cons of these different dashboard solutions. So let's go through the pros first, because I'm a positive person. I'm an optimist. I always think the future is going to be bright. People are visual learners, and this is where dashboards have made a real technological advance. 75% of students at the University of Utah respond very favorably to more visually heavy lecture materials. We have a group on campus there at the university that focuses on how to teach. It's called the Center for Teaching and Learning Excellence. And they are out there often cited as saying 75% of people, not just our students, but 75% of people are visual learners. They cannot learn in any other way. So if you're just standing there with reports and you're just telling people what is happening, for 75% of people, that's not going to work. If you just hand them something to read and you give them this long written report, 75% of the people, it's not the best way for them to learn this. If you include lots of visuals and it is a visual experience, they will learn it. And so this is where dashboards, just doesn't matter what it is, whether it's a do-it-yourself or it's a turnkey solution, this is just an improvement. And it wasn't something that was possible. Reporting was done manually in the past. Someone would have to run numbers, crunch them, put together a PowerPoint, come to a boardroom and present. It was a very inefficient, slow system, but it was the best we could do technologically. Well, that's changed. And the dashboard, a second benefit of this is that that information is always in one place and it's always available. So unlike a report that you may have had to call up an employee and say, hey, what were the numbers on X, Y, and Z last month? Instead, you can just log in to your dashboard at any time from anywhere on any device, usually, and you can get that information. So that's another real value that they add. Some of the solutions allow you to explore the data. This will be, in my opinion, what differentiates those that survive the bubble and those that don't. I mean, a bubble is a negative term in economics because it implies it's going to pop. We went through a dot-com bubble. We're going through a tech bubble right now. Yes, it will pop, but when it does, it will get rid of the less efficient, less commercially viable options in the aggregate. And one of the things that will determine which do-it-yourself solutions survive is how much you can explore the data. Because prior to these dashboard solutions like Tableau or Adaptive Insights that would let you explore, you had very, very limited options in the form of software, SAS, Data, SPSS, Statistica, R, where you'd have to go in, you'd have to run these numbers yourself. And if you saw something of interest, you would then have to know whatever code or whatever drop-down menu or whatever appropriate test to do next. And the more that these dashboard solutions can make that process streamlined for the user and make it so it doesn't depend on a very deep understanding of statistics, the better the chances that they will survive. Another benefit of dashboards, another pro, is that it simplifies the process of sharing. Written reports, especially if they get very large, can be difficult if they have to be printed. We've had some client organizations where because of security concerns, you can't share things on jump drives, you can't use Google Drive, you can't use Dropbox or Box. Really hard sometimes to even share information once it's been produced. And a dashboard solves that. Again, it's in one place. All you need to do is be able to make another user, assign them privileges, and they should be able to access it. But the best pro, and this is why I do believe that dashboards have a very important place in modern business, the biggest pro is that they begin the process of inculcating everyone at the organization to this idea that data needs to be up in front and it needs to be included in the decision making. Not that it should be the sole and only thing, and that's actually, we're going to get into the cons now, but that it should be there. Helps set up this idea that a data culture matters and that everyone needs to have some level of skill in understanding and utilizing data. As far as the cons, there are really four. The first is that, and this doesn't have to do necessarily with dashboard technology, but rather the way it's being sold. If you look at most of the advertising for dashboards, it's a black box, a wonder black box. AI is kind of going through the same thing right now. It's just going to solve every problem you possibly can imagine. And that is just not true. A lot of this information is very limited. We'll get into some of the other criticisms in the cons list here, but it's not a one-stop solution for all your data needs. There are going to be things that a dashboard cannot answer for you. And if you're not aware of those ahead of time, then you buy them hoping for something, your expectations won't match the reality, and you'll be disappointed and you won't continue to subscribe. And that's been the experience of a lot of companies. And that's also part of what's been happening with Tableau's story is people buy it thinking it's going to be easier to use or it's going to do it for them. It doesn't, and then they don't re-up. Depending on what the dashboard needs to integrate with, it can be very costly, very hard. It can take a very long time. Now that's changing. And interestingly, Domo, at their last Domo Palooza in, I believe, March, announced that they were really becoming the integrator, that it wasn't going to be about the dashboard anymore. It wasn't going to be about the intelligence or the insights. It was going to be about connecting to Salesforce and HubSpot and AdWords and analytics and your social channels and whatever you'd want to connect. They will be, and they're out there saying they are the business cloud. That's because the integration is very difficult. And one of the things that Domo was doing in the last few years is they would go there and they would have a monthly subscription, but they would also have these large integration charges. And that's true of other business intelligence solutions. A lot of the machine learning solutions that are out there have these enormous integration costs. So it's not easy, but once it's set up, it should continue to flow and you should have information that you need. Now, what happens when you need to change that? It's code, it's programming, it's going to have to be updated and maintained. Things can go wrong. The API, one of the APIs, let's say you have 15 different APIs and you've got them all coming into one central location where your dashboard is then pulling that information and displaying it. And just one of those APIs changes its protocol. Well, you have to have someone to go back in and fix that. Now, if you're getting a turnkey solution, somebody else handles that. If you've got to do it yourself, then you got to go into your code, figure out what's going wrong, and correct it. So you have this trade-off between flexibility and stability that is an inherent part of dashboards, which means they don't adapt very quickly. The third, and this is by far for me the most important of all the criticisms. Actually, I'll take that back. That's the second most important of all the criticisms. The last one's the most important. But the insights that are provided by dashboards are descriptives usually. Descriptives in the sense of bar charts, pie charts, line charts, scatter plots. And if you're anyone who's been through a stats class or you do analytical work, that is starting position 1 of 1,000. You are describing some data initially to understand it. You want to understand its center, so the average, frequency, the mode, the mean, all the things that you learn in stats. You want to learn its distributional shape, and you want to learn the spread of that information. And that's great. Dashboards provide an insight into that very quickly, but that's usually as far as they go, and that is not far enough because nothing in the world is explained one for one. There is no single metric, and this gets into my fourth and what I believe to be the most important criticism. There is no single silver bullet metric. NPS, Net Promoter Score, is out there. I think the original paper in Harvard Business Review was the one metric you need to grow your business. There's no one metric that will grow your business, because if that one metric exists and you've discovered it, your competitors will discover it, and then they will take advantage of that as well, and they will eat into your market share, and they will lower their costs and find better sourcing, and they will outcompete you. You have to be looking at predictive modeling. You have to be looking at things that get into deeper understanding of differences and relationships. That's where analytics comes in versus descriptives. And even the tools that are starting to add predictive modeling, Domo announced that, Tableau has announced that, it's linear regression modeling. It's not very robust. But ultimately, the worst part about dashboards, in my opinion, is that they create in founding the data culture, they create a false notion that by only watching a couple metrics, you're probably going to be okay. And this gets back to that first criticism of their being sold as a total solution. That's just not true. Yes, you need to look at these descriptives. Yes, they are going to help gauge the performance and growth and success of your company. They will not, however, be sufficient by themselves. And this is why smart analytics is going to kill dashboards if they don't adapt to this. And that's why I said earlier that the do-it-yourself solutions that allow you to really start to explore the data in meaningful ways, they will survive because they will empower this act of smart analytics, which right now is still a human endeavor. So what is it? Let me explain this, because it is the total opposite of dashboards. Smart analytics combines secondary research. So this is anything that already exists. So Quid and some of these other competitive intelligence tools, they are often just pulling information from the public domain. They may have to pay for that, but it's still available publicly. They didn't create it. They weren't involved with formulating how it would be collected. It just exists and you can get access to it. And you should always be looking at secondary research. But that's not enough. You need to combine that with your own proprietary, and this is another competitive advantage. You need to combine it with your own qualitative and quantitative primary research, where you do get to decide, I'm going to go out and I'm going to ask these kinds of questions. I'm going to go out and measure these kinds of things. I will end up with this kind of data, and because of that, I'm going to be able to do this kind of analysis. You have far more control with primary data than you do with secondary data. And the act of just going out and gathering it and aggregating it, you've got to combine those two things to really have a big impact. Another characteristic of smart analytics is that it is iterative and adaptive. So unlike a dashboard where you're going to say, I'm going to measure this KPI and it's going to be the same KPI every month for 12 months a year. Instead of it being that kind of a system, it is, we're going to look at these variables, this data, we're going to see what we learn, and then we're going to decide if we need to study that further or pivot and look at these other things that are connected to it. And because it's iterative and adaptive, agile methods are a great way to guide this process. And 2-week sprints are perfect. You got 10 business days to conduct this secondary research, primary research, to run numbers and to put together preliminary results and bring them for review. And then you get to do it again the 2 weeks after that. So it allows you to get in far more refined, far more granular than you can with a dashboard. But its main benefit is that it moves beyond this world where single metrics are the standard. It is based on an analytical process, predictive data mining, looking for meaningful differences, looking for meaningful connections and patterns, and then tying those straight to a strategy decision. And so when a strategy decision informed by a past bit of information changes, well, a dashboard doesn't change. You'd have to go back and get programmers and say, actually, now I need this other information as well. And they just can't respond that quickly. So smart analytics, always coming back to better strategy decisions, is faster, allows for that more refined analysis, because you can look at something, you can learn from it, you can adapt, and you can move in another direction in less than 2 weeks if you have to. There's a big question right now about how much of even smart analytics can be done by a machine. I will tell you that internally at Imperatos, we have an ongoing debate. There are two camps inside of Imperatos. There is the camp that believes that only 95% of what we do is automatable, and then there is the camp that 99% of what we do is automatable. When that will happen and what it will look like is still up for debate. In either case, no one here believes that a machine is going to be able to do all of it. And whether it is 5% or 1% that remains, that's the part that actually matters. Because a lot of what we still do, and if you go look at your own job, I'm sure you're going to see this, a lot of what you do is repetitive. A lot of what you do is setting up and getting to a moment where you then interpret. And this is where the machines aren't as good as a person. And I think we're still a good ways off from when a machine is going to beat a human at the art of blending all existing theory with evidence and then coming up with prediction that can be explained in a very easy way to people who might not have technical skills. And we'll see if it's 95 or 99. As of right now, assuming that a machine's not going to be able to do it, it still takes a team. There are no data science unicorns out there. I'm going to talk about the different types of data scientists here in a moment. But there was this belief previously that you'd go out and you'd hire a data scientist and they'd solve these problems for you. And then businesses were extremely disappointed when they tried to do this. And that's in part because they didn't understand what they're buying. But there's no single data scientist unicorn out there who's going to be able to do what is a team effort. And I'll get into that here in a moment. But I also want to make one other distinction as I set up this idea of how you're going to build a data culture at your organization so that you can embrace smart analytics and you can utilize your dashboards to inform research direction, but you will be doing iterative analytical processes on top of that every 2 weeks to guide the strategy and stay competitive. Well, who's best suited to do that? And there's a big debate within the data science community between what are seen as traditional statisticians. So these are people who are going to tell you that correlation does not equal causation. These are people who are going to criticize small samples. These are people who are going to force the assumption of normality. They're by the book statisticians, which means they're actually mathematicians. And they are great, and your team certainly needs an element of that. But what it also needs are analysts. And analysts are very different than statisticians because they are data detectives. They will look at multiple sources. They will look at any source that's actually available and weigh all of the evidence against things like quality, consistency. They will bring in anecdotal information that they've heard on top of qualitative interviews on top of quantitative big data, and then they will synthesize all of that and say, based on all of this information, here's what we believe the correct strategy recommendation is. Statisticians will, I don't know, you can try go find a hardline statistician and try to get them to give you a recommendation based on anything that they produce, and usually the standard answer is I can't do that for you because they are taught, and this is still how statistics is typically taught, to be a researcher, you have to be unbiased. And to be unbiased, you have to take an arm's length approach. And that is not the case of an analyst. And that's also why government and large organizations hire analysts and not necessarily statisticians, because the analysts are great at synthesizing everything and then making a recommendation. And they should be the core of this data team that you build. So let me get into the final section, then we'll open it up for questions. How to build data culture, because everything that I've talked about so far, the state of competition, how it has led to the need for real-time information, the way in which real-time information is used, whether it's proprietary internal information or public information, it's still all data. And right now, the majority of people that you have working in your organization don't know how to handle data because it's not been a mandatory skill set. Even in high school, still today, the height of mathematics is calculus. You might learn statistics, but you don't learn it in any sort of deep way in high school. Even in college, there is still an emphasis on, stats having a single class in a discipline. So as an economist, you take one stats class. As a psychologists, you might take one stats class. I was involved in a history department in my undergrad years, and there was an archaeologist there who was trying to use statistics to do microarchaeology, where they were sampling from floors inside of ruined houses and trying to figure out what their use patterns were. So everybody has this need for data, but no one's really had a very strong foundation in it, with the exception of what are now termed data scientists. And these are some people who are earning $1 million incomes a year with giant bonuses. They have their own agents, like they're a sports athlete or a star. And they will only also, by the way, come to an organization where they feel like the culture is correct. And one of the things that they're looking for is that people at the organization beyond themselves are interested in and willing to learn about data. Because if all you do is go out and hire a data scientist and you put them in your accounting department and hope that they're going to solve all your problems as a company, you will be very, very disappointed. That is not what they will do. That's not their role. And that's pretty typical. I mean, I hear from a lot of my former students, and that story is pretty common. That people were excited when they hired them. There was a lot of promise. They get put into isolation. Nobody uses them, and nothing really seems to happen. They move on to a more exciting job at someplace else, and then the first company feels like they got burned. So, if you want to embrace this smart analytics or even a dashboard, or you just want to come into the data age, this means that everybody in your organization is going to have to get some basic data skills. So creating that data culture is a first step. Well, the other thing about data right now is that whatever we were doing this year isn't what we were doing last year. And so you've seen this maybe 3 years ago, 4 years ago. You remember how many people were talking about big data and Hadoop. And then it was all about machine learning. And now it's all about deep learning. And that's because we are watching the explosion of a new discipline, and it's not being driven by the traditional statisticians. It's being driven by a lot of computer programmers. And the willingness and ability to learn new things constantly is another part of that culture that you have to create. If you have people who just are unwilling to learn these new things, they are going to slow you down. And if you're one of those people, you're going to slow down your organization. But data scientist is I don't want to call it a junk term, but it's just a catch-all. It's being used the way that I can tell in the public right now. It is being used to describe three very different types of job descriptions. The first is dealing with storing data in infrastructure, and this is a big task. At some of these large organizations, you're talking about adding terabytes, okay, terabytes of data every single day to your database systems. And that by itself takes people who can plan out the architecture of database environments, can decide on what type of database system you're going to go, whether it's a SQL route or a NoSQL route. And those people are architects. They're going to look at it. They're probably consultants. They're going to look at this and say, here's what we need to build. And then you're going to have IT people who are going to be good at building the actual physical server infrastructure, or deciding that you're going to use the cloud and then integrating with that. And then you have DBAs. These are people who will actually administer the database once it's created and there on the servers, and they will be monitoring equipment, making sure user accounts are created correctly and that permissions are set correctly, ensuring nobody can accidentally delete everything. That's one type of role, and those people are called data scientists. And sometimes when people are seeking to hire data scientists, one of these DBAs comes across their desk and they say, look at all this experience, and they got all this, they know X, Y, and Z, let's hire them. But really, what you may have needed was somebody who does ETL or a coder, and that's the second type of data scientist. These are people who, once the data exists and it's there in a databasing environment, they can retrieve it, they can transform it, they can prepare it for analysis. They might have to write code to send it through a whole series of processes where the data is pulled and then parsed and then posted. That is its own skill set. And this is the one that most people hire, by the way. Say, oh, I need a data scientist, and they find a coder. And again, it may have been that you needed to build a data infrastructure first, and you should have bought an architect instead. And then the third of these types are the traditional statisticians, and then people who are getting very creative and good at visualizing complex data and telling a story with it. And um, there's there's more overlap in the last two of these, in the ETL encoders and the data detectives and statisticians. You'll find a lot of overlap in their skill sets, but they are very unique. You might be hiring somebody who is really good at statistics, which means they're going to know the math that needs to get programmed, but they don't know how to actually code it themselves. And so if you don't then have somebody to help them code it, again, you hired a data scientist to do a certain thing, and you're probably not going to get your end result that you were hoping for. And so understanding the differences between these different types of data scientists is very important, but no matter which one you hire, they're going to fit into a piece of your whole organization. If everybody else isn't prepared and ready to deal with data and handle data, they're not going to be very useful. If as well, you, from an organizational leadership standpoint or a stakeholder or even just part of a team, if you don't understand what it is that you need and what you're going to request of these people, which also means that you understand how you're going to use it when you get the information back, this system won't work either. And so this is why I said that it's not that data scientists are ripping off companies for six-figure incomes. They are worth that right now. I do believe that they're worth it. It's that companies don't know who to hire or how to use them or why they're going to use them when they get into this exchange. They've just heard that big data is all the rage. They've heard they got to get real-time dashboards, and so they go out and they get through 50 resumes. They pick one person. That person might have been a statistician or a coder, and in isolation, they can't do the job, and nobody's happy. And that is the state of things. And something like 80 to 85% of ongoing data projects right now are going to fail. And in part, it's because you have the wrong people doing the wrong things without the right direction. It's not an easy task. And for that reason, our next webinar is going to be based just on this. I will give some tips that I've learned from teaching at the university for the last 6 years, creating data detectives and data scientists. I will also give tips on what we have done here at Imperatos internally to find people and fit them into a consistent system and train them up on what they need, and how we maintain continuous training programs that are tied to our organizational goals. So that will be the whole purpose of the upcoming webinar. But for now, for the last 10 to 15 minutes, I want to open it up. You can ask questions in the questions field, and I will answer them here. And I'll give you a couple moments to type. Okay, so the first question here is about AI. Well, let me read this. Okay, machine learning versus deep learning. So the difference is the scale of data. That's really what it comes down to. And this gets back to the dashboards. That one of the things that will change the pricing of which solution you use and the pricing tied to that solution is going to be the size of data. And big data, just like data scientist, is one of those terms that's just been thrown around. Big data just means that whatever computing power you have available to you can't handle it. So when everybody was using SAS or everybody was using Stata or Statistica or SPSS or R, there were still within it limits to how many rows and how many columns you could use when running all the statistical analysis that you'd be through those software programs. It suddenly became possible because of that connectivity and the real-time information sharing. You had so much more data than these software programs were equipped to deal with. And that was an issue of big data. And if you listen to like old IT veterans, they'll talk about that they've been through a big data scare before. They talk about them in the 80s, they talk about them in the 90s. And because there's been this continual struggle, how much information can we get? Remember, it used to only be the government that could collect data at volume to where you would then run statistical processes like a regression equation on it. That was a domain of the government exclusively for a long period of time. And now today it's something that every organization, if I can be a sole proprietor and I can have more information available to me just from my digital marketing efforts than governments have ever had. And I also now have tools that are capable of solving that problem for me. So the term big data doesn't necessarily mean that there's some arbitrary size to it. And one of the things that's also been clear as we've moved into a world where machines are automating analysis and machines are looking for patterns and machines are learning about patterns, is that the size and the approach changes. The more data you have and the types of data you have would determine whether you're going to use a machine learning approach or you're going to use a deep learning approach. Some of these deep learning students from Stanford are the ones that are getting offered $1 million jobs at the same time that people like Amazon, Google, and Facebook are making all of their open source, all of their deep learning open source. Okay, here's another question. If you could, hold on, I have to figure out how to expand this. If you could hire only one type of data scientist, what one would you hire? I would put the database person last on my list just because if you're to the point where you need to handle and have a very strong database system, it means you probably already have a lot of other data available and it's just in disparate places. And so it would come down to either a coder or a statistician data detective, and I would hire a data detective because that person's going to have enough skills with statistics and with the coding um, to handle most of what you're going to want to do at a small scale where you could get away with it with a single person. But as soon as you want to start to automate, you're going to need someone who really understands programming languages. And that is a very unique skill set. And the danger is that you find a coder who says that they know stats or a statistician who says that they know how to code. Usually neither of those people is correct. They are usually very disproportionately good at one and mildly okay at the other. So if I had to choose, I would say a data detective. Here's another question. Do you have big data? Do you have to have big data to get meaningful insights from a data detective team? Absolutely not. Um, One of the most impactful insights that we've ever delivered for a client was a histogram. And it was a very simplistic histogram that showed user signups and by time of day. And when that one visualization was shown, it triggered a whole discussion within the team that was there in the room because it was a company wide meeting where they said, "Oh, well, I've noticed X, Y, and Z outcomes that match that." And then someone else would jump in and be like, "Yeah, we're dealing with the same thing." So it was the social team that brought up something. And then the team that was over the app said, "Oh, we're seeing the same kind of thing." So that one insight, which came from an analyst, not from a data scientist, just came from, and not from a statistician, but it just came from an analyst asking the question of when are people signing up and does that match with our organizational structure? The answer was clearly no. And it was a single data point. It wasn't a machine learning algorithm using 20 billion rows of data that found it. It was one person mining through some what was frankly simplistic data. And there's another example of that. One of the companies that we've worked with had a shipping contract that wasn't being fulfilled, and they were able to show that through some data mining. It was 4 or 5 metrics that made enough of a case to go to this partner and say, "Hey, we don't think that your programming has been set up correctly because we believe that we're being overcharged." And sure enough, that was true. So it does not have to be big data to be useful data. Other questions? If I had to endorse one do-it-yourself solution and one turnkey solution, which would it be? I would say for the do-it-yourself solution, R Shiny. For the turnkey solution, Grow. What data needs the most attention from data scientists from an ROI perspective? Ooh, that is a good one. Um, so data scientists are really good at programming and implementing complex processes. So I would say predictive modeling. And from an ROI standpoint, I think the two places that a data scientist can add the most value from an ROI perspective is at the beginning of the customer journey and at the end of the customer journey. So at the beginning, it's all about awareness. And if you can, attribution modeling attempts to do some of this, but if you can predict very early on which channel your best customer is going to come through, and then once they're in that channel, they have the most success, meaning you're predicting that they actually sign up or they subscribe or they purchase. That's a really good problem to tackle with a data scientist. The other is on the tail end of the customer journey when they're considering leaving. Usually at that point, you have far more data. So when you talk about awareness, you're talking about Google AdWords, Google Analytics, maybe unbounced landing page data, social media data that you're blending together to try to paint a picture of where everybody's coming from and in what kind of order. That is far more difficult to do because you're piecing together data sets that don't always have one for one connections. When you're talking about retention, this person's already a customer. So if you have a good CRM in place, you should have all kinds of financial metrics on them. You should have all kinds of product usage information on them. And it should be in a consistent form. And so using that, and that's also proprietary information, using that proprietary information to predict when someone's going to churn out or not is really useful. And that's also why if you go look right now online, I'm sure that you can find a half a dozen data science for hire SaaS products that will do churn analysis, and they're going to have a dashboard attached to them. Any other questions? When will the bubble pop? Uh, did it already with Tableau? I mean, these things don't happen. They're bubbles. There's not one doom and gloom day usually to bubbles. It's a series of things that erode people's confidence in the future prospects of things like dashboards that lead to the bubble finally popping. Um, Tableau stock plummeted in a day. And I think that's the first sign that, let me put in two bits of qualifying bits of information about this. First and foremost, I am not a financial planner. I'm an economist. Do not take my advice to plan your financial future. I will not be held liable for that. Um, Second, uh, it doesn't always have to be doom and gloom when a bubble pops. And um, I think that Tableau's giant stock collapse reflects two realities. One is that there's way too much hype right now in growth. People saying grow, 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 grow. Like I drive up and down I-15 here because I live in Utah County, but our offices are in Salt Lake and I work in Salt Lake. And that stretch of the interstate is full of billboards with all the Utah tech companies, the Silicon Slopes, who are out there pointing out their growth. And I actually saw one that was denominated in 10,000 percentage point units. And I just because you grow doesn't mean you're going to retain anybody. That's one of the lessons that's been learned the hard way by a lot of the tech companies here in the United States and even in Utah. You might be able to turn on awareness really fast. You might be able to get over consideration to a purchase very quickly. But if the people don't get what they expected, they're not going to stay. And so your real market value is not as high as you want. And so valuations have been out of control. Could it have been that Tableau, because by the way, Tableau reported a good, I mean, they had good news, it just wasn't good enough. And that eroded confidence. And so it could be that there's some of that in play here, that it's just adjusting to more realistic valuations. I don't think that's the case because you also have a ton of competitors emerging. And that's because it's not that complicated to write programming code to grab data sources and visualize it. So I think the bubble's already popped, and what we'll see is the price of these different tools continually getting pressure to go lower and lower and lower to stay competitive. Any final questions? Where do you find data talent? Well, that's something we'll actually cover in the next webinar. I will talk about university systems. I'll talk about public source, open source, so MOOCs and other forms of public education, edX movement. I think one of the really good pieces that you'll get from the next webinar about how to vet these people is that you have to give them a real task. It doesn't matter if they're coming in with a degree or a Coursera certificate. The bottom line is you're going to have specific tasks for them to do. If they can't do those, you shouldn't hire them. So don't just hire because they came from a source, hire because they can actually do something. And that is something we will get into in the next webinar. Thank you, everybody, for joining me. The conversation does not have to end here. All of our contact information, including our Twitter account, is on there. Stay in touch, and we will see some of you at the next webinar. Thanks.